Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In our last few videos, we've been really critical of the New Republic's political and military structure. And as we mentioned in our last video, that is partly due to the fact that Favreau and Filoni have crafted a few select scenes that really highlight the negative sides of the New Republic. Why they are building up this narrative so quickly at the end of the Galactic Civil War is unknown, but I am curious. But on this channel, whenever we go a little too far to one extreme, we like to always bring it back by taking a look at the other side. And today I kind of want to assess why the New Republic defense fleet specifically is actually in a much better position than we realize. Especially when you compare it to something even as robust as the Imperial military, which by all definitions was a powerhouse. So yeah, these scenes in The Mandalorian and Ahsoka have portrayed the New Republic as terribly cringy and just unjust at moments. But these are just small glimpses and anecdotes about the New Republic Defense Force that don't necessarily show us the entire story. In works of fiction, a director or creator has complete control over what you see on screen, and oftentimes they manipulate the audience in order to serve the narrative, to surprise us with something cool, oftentimes. So it's actually really good to just zoom out a little bit, take a look at the wider picture before you make your assessment or judgment. The New Republic Defense Fleet, when one puts defense in the name of their military force, it gives us the impression that war, especially offensive war, is off the table, both politically and militarily speaking. Some might perceive this as a major weakness, the same type of people who might say that a powerful military should be aggressive and should have large parades and public displays to showcase their power. Well, actually, not only is that a great sign of little dick energy, it's also a great way to waste your taxpayers' money. It's also a great way to show your enemies your military capabilities. It's not a good idea. It also breeds the kind of nationalism that gets your country thrown headfirst into unnecessary wars, which can create an avalanche of economic, social, and political problems for many generations into the future. You see, a powerful military, just like a powerful and confident person, doesn't need to constantly show off what they're capable of. It's because they know exactly what they're capable of right in here. Was it that Teddy Roosevelt always said, speak quietly and carry a big-ass stick? And that is why the New Republic should not be underestimated based on its nomenclature. Yes, they have a lot of problems, a lot of issues, but a lack of turbo lasers and overly aggressive ships is not one of them. Some of the most powerful militaries on Earth have the word defense in their name, like the Japanese Self-Defense Force. Their constant battles against the kaijus rising out of the Pacific Rim makes them one of the best equipped military forces in the world. For instance, they maintain one of the largest and most advanced fleets of Gundam mobile suits in the entire world. Then you have an organization like the Finnish Defense Force, which is capable of turning your average Finnish schoolteacher, farmer, mechanic into some of the finest conscripted soldiers in the world. When you have a properly managed state that does a really good job at taking care of its civilian populace, what you get as a result is a highly competent civilian defense force. It's not just about having a warrior culture, it's not just about having good training and weapons, it's also about people who are satisfied with their life, well educated and well adjusted. Plus they have a massive artillery pool, so that helps as well. Then you have the Israeli Defense Force, which can trace its legacy back to a bunch of scrappy Jews, some who only recently survived the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust, only to be attacked by every Arab country that neighbored them, and then some. This country, literally the size of New Jersey, except it's thinner in some locations, was able to fight multiple wars against overwhelming odds, completely outnumbered in every direction. A modern-day tale of David versus Goliath. What can we learn about these three very different militaries that add the word defense in them? And how does that relate to the New Republic's defense fleets? Well, each one of these military forces are built for defensive purposes, that is clear, but what's far more important is the societies and government structures that back them. You see, each one of these countries are flawed but functional democracies that have a robust free market-oriented economy that also supports an indigenous military-industrial complex. It's one of the most potent combinations of political, social, and economic policies, and when run properly, nothing is as efficient as it. And it's because this system allows the largest amount of people in society to reach their maximum potential and contribute positively to their economy and benefit as a result. More economic production, a freer society, happier society equals a more robust military capability. should you need it? Should your free society deem it's necessary? I mean, that's the big caveat here. Now, should your free society decide to worry more about culture wars, partisan bickering, or something even more legitimate, like, I don't know, rebuilding the galaxy after a 4-year galactic civil war, then it can miss threats. Threats like a bunch of evil space Nazis who converted a f***ing moon into a super laser. Sometimes even the best systems can be caught sleeping and lose. And here's the thing, guys, there's no guarantees in life. There's no perfect solution. And, representative democracies have the tendency of becoming complacent and kind of lazy while basking in their own glory and success. Us Americans were amazing at doing this. And while you're at the top, it's easy to forget that the, smallest, shortest, and dumbest kid in class can just walk up straight to you and kick you in the nuts if you're not paying attention and win. But yeah, should you be stupid enough to pose a threat to this type of system in a fair and open fight? Well, just take a look at what happened to the Mandalorian Crusade after the Old Republic woke up from its slumber. Yes, Revan did lead the charge, but so did an endless stream of hammerhead cruisers. They were never as powerful as their Sith or Mandalorian counterparts, but there's a reason why they continued to be in service for nearly 4,000 years. They were easy and cheap to build and quickly outnumbered whatever Sith or Mandalorian death machine that was thrown at them. It's like the Sherman tank of the Old Republic. And for those of you who don't understand that reference, the Sherman tank was one of the most prolific tanks used by the Allies during World War II. And it wasn't built by traditional defense contractors. It was built by auto manufacturers like Chrysler and Ford. These tanks even featured car-like manual transmissions with a clutch pedal and a freaking steering wheel. On paper, it wasn't the coolest or most powerful tank. It had relatively weak armor and a weak armament, especially in the first few editions. But it was everywhere and always available. It was relatively reliable, which means that it was the best tank on most battlefields simply because it was the only one that made it there. The Sherman was the product of a free society, which hired professionals to design their tanks, and they hired some of the best manufacturers in the world at the time. I mean, Ford practically invented the whole mass manufacturing thing to build this thing. It was a product made by committee, which featured the inputs of many different individuals. It's truly the American way. Meanwhile, we got Hitler over here doing meth in his bunker, building King Tiger tanks, revenge rockets, and jet planes, while his soldiers are running out of food and ammunition. And we also have Palpatine over here building the Death Star, a moon-sized super laser, when his Imperial army can't even take Mim-Bum from a bunch of primitives and are forced to engage in trench warfare. And so we have to remember the New Republic, despite all the criticism we levied towards it, is still a functional representative democracy. It has checks and balances, elected officials, all the things that make a government functional. I mean, look at Mon Mothma's face as these senators insult a war hero right in front of her. The same war hero who whisked her away from the Imperial grass decades ago when she was just an opposition politician in the Imperial Senate. For all the mistakes that Mon Mothma made, including the demilitarization of the New Republic Defense Fleet, you have to respect her for having so much discipline, for not allowing her feelings and emotions get in the way of her decision making. She never interfered, tried to circumvent the political system in order to blunt force legislation through. Like George Washington, she understood her role in history perfectly. She didn't want to set a precedent for tyranny as the first chancellor in this fledgling New Republic. The messiness we see in the New Republic, the political infighting that makes so many people yearn for the Empire's return, well, it's not for everyone. It's not for the squeamish, it's not for the snowflakes, it's not for the sensitive individual who gets offended at any type of counter-argument. Dictators like Hitler were always obsessed with cleanliness and couldn't stand opposition or criticism or diversity. They want control because they're fearful. They're fearful of the truth of humanity. That we are a messy, chaotic, but also beautiful species. We're dumb, but also deserving of the many great achievements we've made in our history. And republics mirror that imperfection. They are also chaotic and full of disagreement, and occasionally even fistfights erupt on the Senate floor. Ask a poli-sci major what they think about the divisiveness in American politics right now, and they'll say, finally the people have awoken. They actually care enough to fight for something. That's a very optimistic poli-sci major, mind you. People who are new to the political scene, and there are so many thanks to the wonderful education tool that is social media, might be turned off by all the shouting and yelling and selfish agenda and selfish advocacy. For a lot of people, finding out that our political system is not perfect and has flaws and corruption is like finding out that the tooth fairy is not real. And I understand this could be really scary and disheartening to learn that this is how things actually work, but I assure you it's still the best system available out there, and that's because in a republic you have all the ideas placed out there in the open for people to see, and they get to battle it out. And it used to be the losing side just, agree to shake the other side's hand and quietly go into a corner and focus on the next battle, instead of threatening secession or saying that the game's rigged and unfair, like some pussy. Yes, there's corruption. Yes, there's corporate backers. There's gross partisanship. And we have to fight these things. But what we can't do is just completely give up on it and fall for authoritarianism or some other lesser system. The decentralization of power and openness of discussion will always lead to the optimal solution in a faster time. The alternative, an authoritarian-style political system where disagreement and political discussion are discouraged and an orthodoxy is created and guarded by a hierarchical power structure, usually in a pyramid shape. These are systems that are highly susceptible to the flaws and ego of a small group of people or just one individual sometimes. And naturally, these systems are cynical about the quality of man. They are fearful and hateful towards humankind, and oftentimes the leaders forget that they too are human as well. And oftentimes these leaders create policies that are self-fulfilling prophecies. The lack of trust a leader has for the civilian populace will only make the civilian populace less trustful. And therefore, military spending to build massive security apparatuses becomes central to the identity of these types of states. Authoritarian governments generally are not defined by their economic power or social system, but their military force, which creates a false sense of social cohesion. And if you ask them what is the most important part of a modern military force, well, according to these North Koreans, it's this amazing display of masculinity and prowess. Meanwhile, the South Korean missile trooper, 100 kilometers to the south, who might be a die-hard K-pop groupie on the weekends and has a better skincare routine than your wife and weighs 130 pounds wet, is laughing his ass off in his air-conditioned bunker at the North Korean soldier on YouTube. Meanwhile, in the other browser window, he's prepping a Hyunmoo 3 Guardian of the Northern Sky cruise missile with a 500-kilogram payload and a 500-mile range. The North Koreans, their dictatorship speaks a really big game. They spend double-digit percentages of their GDP on military expenses every year. This is a nation in the past that frequently had famines and still deals with food insecurity today, which is why the average South Korean man is around 5 inches taller than their northern counterparts. It's not funny, it's severe malnutrition. South Korea, on the other hand, spends around an average of 2.5% of their GDP on defense. The thing is that 2.5% is going to come to around $45 billion a year, which is more than North Korea's entire GDP. Well, why is that? Well, this might sound a little familiar to all you Galactic Empire fans out there. You see, North Korea's official political and economic policy can be described by the word Songun, which is a military-first policy, adopted in the early 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union. North Korea found itself increasingly isolated. At one time, the North Korean economy was much larger and more powerful than the South's, but due to the collapse of the Soviet Union, which it was tied so closely to, it started seeing its economy shrink year after year. The Songun military-first policy is really a wartime policy, sort of like what the Confederacy of Independent Systems went through during the Clone Wars. It was greatly outnumbered by the Republic, and so private industries in the Confederacy were converted into full-time war production in order to meet the demands of the war. Every separatist citizen, while not compelled to fight in the conflict, were encouraged to donate their time and funds. This was highly disruptive for society. When doctors stop working, a medical crisis occurs. When construction workers and utility repairmen are drafted, the infrastructure begins to fail at home. When freighter pilots are shifted towards hauling weapons and munitions instead of food and fuel, all costs grow higher. A military-first policy only really works when defending your country will actually preserve industrial and economic capabilities. But if you are a military-first country during a time of peace, well, that just completely limits your growth potential. And this is why South Korea's economy dwarfs the North's by several times. The empire always had a similar military-first mentality. It integrated the school system into an Imperial military academy system. Suddenly the best athletes, brightest minds, and most talented artists were working for the empire and its military forces. Formerly private shipyards and factories that were, designing civilian and military hardware for profit were rolled into the empire's massive and bloated military-industrial complex. One that faced no competition, one that didn't have to fight for, military contracts. It was just basically everything. And its one sole job was to create a massive military force for the Empire at the lowest and cheapest price possible, even if it meant using slave labor. And how that play out? And how they pay for it all? Well, Palpatine took over the intergalactic banking clans and essentially started printing currency, devaluing everyone's credits, making people several times poorer overnight. And what did the Empire produce with this huge amount of borrowed credits or printed credits? The massive and supposedly state-of-the-art Imperial-class Star Destroyer, which was equipped with a few squadrons of hyperdriveless TIE fighters. You see, defense spending only can prevent economic loss. It rarely can create any type of growth. And especially these ships, which were essentially massive battleships with line-of-sight turbolasers and short-range fighters, which was just not a good idea in the infinite expanse of space. It makes no sense. And rumors are the triangle shape of the Imperial-class Star Destroyer was actually inspired by Palpatine's research about ancient Sith-inspired ships.
It is too round on the top. It needs to be pointy. Round is not scary. Pointy is scary. This will put a smile on the faces of the enemy. They will think that it is a huge robot's dildo flying towards them.
Typical megalomaniac dictator behavior. You know things are bad when a politician begins designing military hardware. And so the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, as beautiful and iconic as it is pretty much as low-tech and stupid as you can get with ship designs for this era. I mean, here on Earth, we phased out the idea of battleships the second it was clear aircraft carriers were going to reign supreme. And now even those carriers are becoming more and more antiquated. But such is the nature of war. I mean, people just don't want to die very easily. When muskets started getting rifling and turning into rifles, people started moving behind cover and further away. When you started putting 14-inch deck guns onto battleships, other ships would also back further away and start using planes to drop bombs. The Galactic Republic, which, let me remind you, preceded the Empire, produced the outstanding Venator-class Star Destroyer. Well, they actually contracted the Quad-Drive Yards to do it. This was before it was nationalized by the Empire. The Venator wasn't as robust or well-armed as the ISD, but it never needed to be, because it could hold several hundred starfighters on board and send them via hyperspace to attack an Imperial ship before it could even get close. If you want to take a look at what would happen in real life between an Imperial-class Star Destroyer and a Venator-class Star Destroyer, just Google Wagner versus US in Syria. Yes, that really happened, and I can't believe we just covered it up. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. The Republic Navy, despite being considerably smaller than the Imperial Navy, could have easily wiped them out. And after close analysis of the New Republic defense fleet, what do we see? A New Republic cruiser, much smaller and more efficient than the MC-80 Star Cruiser and Nebulon B frigates that made up the Rebel Alliance Navy. These New Republic cruisers could carry up to 4 squadrons of starfighters, and it would honestly just take one of these smaller ships to prevent a serious challenge to an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. Battles aren't just fought by soldiers and the equipment they're given, the ships, the tanks. It's also about the economics, the society that creates all the people who do the fighting. It's about the research and development, your scientific community, your logistical and transport capabilities. All things that a representative democracy with a free market does better than any other system out there. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.